You're not Steve Rogers.
You're right. I'm not.
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Captain America: Brave New World.
Jeez, person, you look fancy.
This movie is packed with references to past MCU films and teases a few setups for Robert Downey Jr.'s Dr. Doom. And if it's been a while since you've seen The Incredible Hulk, you might be lost, but don't worry, I'm going to explain Ross, the leader, and what all of this means for Avengers Secret Wars. And guys, I am so excited to show you these new shirts we designed for our merch store. We have the Cap RPG, where he's presented with two choices in an elevator: Hail Hydra, or does anybody want to get out? We also have the Ross 24 campaign shirt with the motto, Together, the America's Ass commemorative stamp. You can join our store membership with the link below so you don't miss exclusive deals and bundles. So let's get going. So I want to give you guys a very brief recap on where we are in the MCU.
These are confusing times.
Now, we did a very in-depth recap of all this in our recap video, but just in case you want a fast refresher, here we go. In The Incredible Hulk, Thaddeus Ross was hunting down Bruce Banner because he wanted to replicate the Hulk serum in his blood to create a new army of super soldiers. This is how he got the nickname the Hulk Hunter. In that movie, we see that he was estranged from Betty Ross, Banner's ex-girlfriend. So Ross recruited a special forces soldier named Emil Blonsky to help him track down Banner, and then he gave him a modified version of the super soldier serum that gave Steve Rogers his abilities. So it makes a lot of sense that this movie is both a sequel to the Captain America franchise and the Incredible Hulk. The Incredible Hulk franchise only started because they were trying to replicate that original Steve Rogers super soldier serum. So then Ross tracked down Banner to a university where he was working with Samuel Stearns on a cure. Instead, Stearns mutates Blonsky into the Abomination, and then he and Hulk duke it out in Harlem. But Stearns also mutated, as we see in this movie. Now, as for how Sam became Captain America, after Avengers Endgame, Steve Rogers retired and gave the shield to Sam Wilson. Sam eventually accepted the title of Captain America and fulfilled all of our dreams. He yelled at a politician in public.
You've got to do better, Senator.
After the Avengers returned half the world's population, an event called the Blip, this caused a massive refugee crisis with 3 billion people suddenly homeless. So a global organization called the GRC took control of the refugee crisis, but they did a pretty lousy job, leading to a terrorist group called the Flag Smashers to attack the GRC, and also they made some pretty good points.
Yeah, essentially these people, they want a world that's unified without borders.
Now, meanwhile, there has been unrest all around the planet. The world governments are worried about Wakanda becoming a global superpower, and they're trying to secure their own vibranium. Superpowered aliens form an independent nation in Norway, and weirdest of all, a space god hatched from the Earth and was turned into adamantium by a space robot. But recently, it's been revealed that a sect of Skrulls wanted to irradiate the Earth and take it over for themselves. So they began a terrorist campaign and tried to assassinate the former president. Following this, the president declared open season on every alien on Earth.
That is why tonight, I'm presenting to Congress for immediate emergency authorization a bill that designates all off-world born species enemy combatants.
Which led to mass panic.
Which will not be acknowledged in this movie.
Correct.
Hey, how come you're all dressed up and stuff?
Oh, because I went to the red carpet to see the movie.
Oh, I never get to see fancy movie star kind of stuff. Oh, jeez.
Oh man, I love any chance to get dressed up. And did you notice I am wearing a very subtle Captain America tie with a Captain America silver tie bar, and I even have Captain America cufflinks.
That's so cool. Did you get those from Captain America?
No, he's not a real... You know what? Never mind. I got all of this from Cufflinks.com. They're the sponsor of this video. Cufflinks is one of my all-time favorite sponsors for the channel. This site is amazing. They have officially licensed merch from Star Wars, Marvel, DC Comics, Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Star Trek, and like all sports teams. Cufflinks is the perfect place to shop for people that are hard to shop for. Like right now, I'm also wearing this Captain America stainless steel cuff bracelet, Captain America lapel pin, and get this, even my pocket square shows the reproduction of Cap's shield that Tony Stark found in Iron Man 2. I just love how creative these designs are. Like sometimes they hide characters on the ties. Like how, for instance, this tie has very small Black Panther masks, but you know, this one shows Cap's shield in full view. So Cufflinks now has a special discount for ScreenCrush fans. If you use the code ScreenCrush20, you get 20% off site-wide. This is a huge discount that you can get through my link or by using the code ScreenCrush20.
Person, I can't believe you went to the big red carpet premiere without me.
What are you talking about? I didn't go to the red carpet. I stood on this red carpet. Oh, buddy, I would never go anywhere without you.
Ah, thanks, person.
Again, click my link below and use the code ScreenCrush20 to get 20% off your purchase site-wide. Now, back to Brave New World. So the movie begins with a photo negative of the Marvel Studios logo, which calls to mind deep state conspiracy thrillers like Oliver Stone's JFK, but it also shares an aesthetic with the opening titles of mystery thrillers like David Fincher's Seven. Captain America: The Winter Soldier was inspired by 70s conspiracy thrillers like 3 Days of the Condor, The Parallax View, and Marathon Man, while this movie seems to draw from 90s inspired thrillers like, for instance, Harrison Ford's Clear and Present Danger, Air Force One, and Enemy of the State. And there are nods to other conspiracy classics that we'll talk about as we go along. And then we're introduced to Harrison Ford as the new president, Thaddeus Ross. Now, Ross has been around in the comics since the Hulk's first issue in 1962. He was the Army general in charge of the gamma bomb test that turned Banner into the Hulk. Now, just like in the movies, he is the father of Betty Ross, Bruce's love interest. So in the comics, he remained a military antagonist to the Hulk for years, but the MCU widened his role. He was first played by Sam Elliott in Ang Lee's The Hulk, and the 2008 film is a kind of soft reboot sequel, like we talked about in this video. So Ross was recast in 2008's Incredible Hulk and then played by Academy Award winner William Hurt. Now, like I said earlier, in the MCU, Ross was heading up a military program to recreate the serum that turned Steve Rogers into a super soldier, but instead it created the Hulk, and then Ross hunted Banner because,
as far as I'm concerned, that man's whole body is property of the U.S. Army.
Now, in the comics and in the movie, hunting Banner became an obsession. In the movie, he even recruits a soldier named Emil Blonsky and gives him part of the cocktail that turns him into
An abomination.
So this began Ross's antagonistic relationship towards superheroes. So when he became Secretary of State, he immediately tried to rope the heroes in. He convinced Tony Stark and half the Avengers to sign the Sokovia Accords and imprisoned heroes like fugitives, even hunting down Black Widow. Now, following the events of Secret Invasion that we talked about earlier, Ross became president and was recast by Harrison Ford after William Hurt passed away in 2022. So I love that Ross is basically a co-lead in this movie. He's always been portrayed as just the antagonist to superheroes, but this is the first MCU movie that kind of treated him like a real person, and the central story revolves around this idea: can Ross change? Like, the character that we've seen in the past was an obsessive monster who even put his ambitions ahead of the love of his daughter.
Don't ever speak to me as your daughter again.
The leader's goal in this movie is to prove that Ross is still that monster by turning him into a literal monster. And we do see that that old Ross still lingers because the opening score uses military drums as Ross's theme to show that deep down he's still an old soldier. Initially, we see Ross as a silhouette, hinting that this movie is going to be about him confronting his dark side. And maybe, like Dewey Cox, Ross just has to think about his whole life before he presidents. Now, we see that his campaign slogan was "Together," much like on our Ross 24 shirt. And we see that this is how Ross hopes to govern, by bringing together the nations of the world for a common cause. Notice he's even wearing a striped red and blue tie to show that he is trying to be president for the red and blue states. And of course, this is Harrison Ford's second time playing the Prez, after he beat up Gary Oldman as a terrorist in Air Force One.
Get off my plane.
Fun note about that movie, there was a scene where they couldn't quite get the punch right, and so he told Gary Oldman, "Just slug me in the face." So this punch is real. But Ross's rosebud is his only family member, Betty Ross. Even now, at the zenith of his power, he still just wants to know if his daughter has bothered to reach out to him. So in his first speech, he makes an appeal to restore normalcy to the nation. He recounts the events of Infinity War and Endgame when everybody blipped away for 5 years. And then he catches us up on the ending of the Eternals that we talked about earlier. Then we get a news montage that gives the audience a ton of exposition. Like, guys, MCU movies have always done this, even Guardians of the Galaxy.
Scattered riots broke out across the Kree Empire today, protesting the recent peace treaty signed by the Kree Emperor.
But in this movie, the broadcast also randomly mentions that Betty Ross was Banner's girlfriend. This was clearly stuff that was added in reshoots, and it's not very good. But in the news montage, we also get to see Harrison Ford with a mustache, and it looks ridiculous. So this is when we find out that he blamed the Abomination's Harlem attack on Samuel Stearns, as we transition to Sam's opening mission. So we start with this guy in the chair, Joaquin Torres, the new Falcon. Torres appeared in Falcon and the Winter Soldier as Sam's Air Force buddy who was good at fixing things, like Anakin.
I'm good at fixing things.
The show ends with Sam handing him his broken wings and saying, "Hey, you fix these."
Fix my broken wings so you can be the Falcon in the next movie.
Well done, high five. So in the comics, Joaquin is a Mexican immigrant who was kidnapped by the Sons of the Serpent after graduating high school.
Oh, like the Serpent Society?
No, so this movie features Giancarlo Esposito as Sidewinder, who leads a group of snake-themed villains in the comics. I wish they had the guts to give him a comic-accurate costume in the movie, though. That would have been cool. The Sons of the Serpent are a group of racists who want global domination. They kidnapped Joaquin and other kids to experiment on them, and then they turned Joaquin into a half-human, half-bird, half-vampire hybrid.
It is half man, half bear, and half pig.
Long and needlessly complicated story short, Sam rescues him, and then his bird Red Wing had previously encountered vampires, so he was immune to the vampire virus. So they spliced the bird's DNA with Joaquin's, giving him the ability to fly, and he became the new Falcon.
Yeah, it's probably better they stuck with he's Sam's friend that fixes wings.
Yeah, I agree. So Sam's call sign is Eagle 1, as we see that he continues to work closely with the US military. So this is the first of many parallels with the movie Captain America the Winter Soldier, which began with Steve doing missions for the government. Although I should say this isn't anything new for Sam. He was working for the Air Force in the first episode of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. He's been sent to keep a group called the Serpents from stealing Japan's sample of adamantium. So the Serpents are based on the Captain America villains, the Serpent Society, a cabal of snake-themed villains created by the Sidewinder. In the comics, Sidewinder wears a ridiculous snake costume, but Giancarlo Esposito's version is more of a badass mercenary, although his trench coat lapels look a little bit like his original snake-themed costume. Funny story, back when Marvel Studios announced their Phase 3 slate, they originally trolled fans by saying Captain America 3 was going to be called Serpent Society until Feige announced that actually they were doing Captain America Civil War.
I'm having buyer's remorse on that Serpent Society subtitle for Captain America 3. It feels like there must be a better title somewhere.
Now, in the comics, Sam Wilson grew up in Harlem and his parents were murdered, leaving him to raise his brother and sister. He was a social worker, similar to how we see Sam volunteering at the VA in The Winter Soldier.
Some stuff you leave there, other stuff you bring back. It's our job to figure out how to carry it.
Sam always had an affinity for birds, buying a falcon named Red Wing during a trip to Rio, and of course that's the name of his drone in the MCU.
I'm not thinking that thing.
His name is Red Wing.
Very long story short, Sam and Steve both found themselves on the Island of the Exiles, where the Red Skull had a cosmic cube.
Oh, like a Rubik's Cube?
No, more like a wish-granting cube. And he used the cube to give Sam a telepathic link to Red Wing. Long story short, they defeat the Red Skull, and Steve helps Sam become the superhero the Falcon, his new partner in crime. In fact, for a long time, his comic was even renamed Captain America and the Falcon. But in Sam's early appearances, he was just a guy who happened to control a falcon, like the Falconer.
You will be the Falcon, and I shall remain the Falconer.
Sam didn't get his actual wings until almost 4.5 years later in issue 171. And, just like in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, they were made from Wakandan technology. So for decades, he was simply Captain America's best friend until a villain called the Iron Nail drained super serum from Steve's body. This turned him into an ordinary 90-something-year-old man, like he is now in the MCU. So he passed the mantle of Captain America onto Sam, just like we saw at the end of Endgame. A key difference here is that in the comics, Steve actually stuck around for a while and ran S.H.I.E.L.D. So Sam had a successful run as Captain America, but left the mantle behind after a vigilante he was trying to save was falsely imprisoned and beaten while he was in jail. In the show Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Sam passes up the chance to be Captain America, and the government gives the shield to a man named John Walker. The pressure eventually gets to John, and the super soldier serum drives him insane, and he kills a man in broad daylight. Afterwards, Sam trains with the shield, and the Wakandans gave him these new vibranium wings. So this is why, in this movie, we still see Sam kind of struggling with the weight of this decision. He's still not sure if he's the right person to carry on the name of Captain America. And I think the movie does a good job summarizing the events of the show. Like if you skip from Endgame to this movie, you wouldn't feel lost at all. But there is a very cool callback during this fight where Sam flips with one arm on the ground as he throws the shield. And we saw him practicing the same move in episode 5 of Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And there's also a great adjustment to his new suit. Sam no longer wears that silly cowl that made his ears stick out. Now his helmet is made of removable Wakandan nanotech. And his suit can also absorb and disperse kinetic energy, just like we saw T'Challa do in Black Panther. We see that his drone Red Wing is able to read heat signatures in the Abbey, and we first saw this ability used in Captain America Civil War. And then we get a good old-fashioned MCU hallway fight as Sam shows us some new moves with his suit and shield. So I loved in particular this moment when his wings were sheathed, but he used his thrusters to charge forward and hit people with the shield. It's great that they really thought about how much his fighting style would have evolved over the years, and he pulls off a lot of cool new moves all throughout the movie. And it also differentiates him from Steve Rogers. Instead of standing still and punching people, he's able to incorporate his ability to fly with the shield in ways that we've just never seen in a Marvel movie before. Now he's able to defuse the hostage situation to use Red Wing to not target civilians, just like the smart targeting that Tony Stark used in Iron Man 1. Notice that the Serpents actually have custom patches, which is unusual for a mercenary organization. But then again, S.H.I.E.L.D. put their logo on everything.
Does announcing your identity on clothing help with the covert part of your job?
Then he has an extended fight against Copperhead, similar to how Steve Rogers showed off his new fighting techniques against Batroc the Leaper and Winter Soldier. And in both fights, the Captains America don't use their shields to prove that they don't need a weapon to kick this guy's ass. And he ends the fight by doing that badass cap shield flip that we've seen Steve Rogers do many times in past movies. Meanwhile, Joaquin gets his own hero moment with no one around to see it.
Nobody saw that.
Which reminded me a lot of Rhodey looking for validation when he told this story.
Boom. Are you looking? Why do I even talk to you guys? Everywhere else that story kills.
That's the whole story?
Yeah, it's a War Machine story.
Later, Joaquin asks if he gets to meet Ant-Man, which could be because he's a fan of Scott Lang's podcast that we heard about in Ms. Marvel, or he's read his book, Look Out for the Little Guy. Or this could just be a nod to how Sam had to fight Scott in the first Ant-Man movie.
I'm Ant-Man. Ant-Man? What, you haven't heard of me?
Then we go back to Ross as he visits his wife's grave, and the epitaph reads, "Keep your face to the sunshine and the shadows will fall behind you." And Ross now takes this as his life mission statement as he tries to change who he is. He's trying to put his mistakes behind him and focus on his bright new tomorrow. But those shadows from his past are not done with him. He buried Stearns underground, literally in the shadows, and those old sins are coming to ruin what he's trying to build.
Back again.
Notice the cherry trees around his wife's grave, and these cherry trees have a symbolism that we'll talk about later on. And then we catch up with Isaiah Bradley. Like the movie says, he was a government test subject for the super soldier serum in the 1950s, but the government locked him away to keep the experiments a secret. Now this was all adapted from the excellent comic book Truth, Red, White, and Black by Robert Morales and Kyle Baker. Isaiah doesn't like that Sam is working for the government, and you know what? Fair point. Captain America is supposed to be independent, and in the movie, he's a little too close to the government for my money.
And remember, kids, the next time that somebody tells you the government wouldn't do that, oh yes they would.
While Isaiah is getting ready to train Joaquin, he destroys a heavy bag and then slings another one casually onto his shoulder, just like Steve Rogers did in his first scene in The Avengers. Sam mentions that Ross hunted him, Steve, and Natasha, but he doesn't mention Wanda at all, maybe because now she's viewed as a villain after the events of Westview. In his office, we see photographs of two very important black athletes, Jackie Robinson, who broke the color barrier in baseball and stood up to horrible racist attacks, and this is Jack Johnson, who all the way back in 1908 became the first black heavyweight champion of the world. He held that title for 7 years, despite intense racial backlash from the government and from the American people. And this is Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, one of the greatest who ever played the game, who some people in white society criticized when he changed his name after converting to Islam. So Isaiah, like these athletes, was an exceptionally gifted man who wasn't given the same opportunities as the white men of his era. But Sam has been there to show him that times are slowly changing. He made sure that Isaiah's story was immortalized in the Smithsonian, and he got him an invite to the White House. And guys, how adorable was it that Isaiah wears his only suit, the one he was married in? Remember, in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, we find out that his wife actually died while he was in prison.
She died while I was in jail. They never let a single one of her letters get to me.
So this suit has special meaning for him. And later, when they arrest Isaiah, we hear him asking them to please not damage his suit.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yes, it is. And then they go to the Celestial Island One World Summit.
Hey, how do they know that that thing's called a Celestial?
Well, I wondered the same thing, and our very own Brianna McLarty has a theory that they were told this by the Asgardians. The logo for the Celestial Island Summit is the Celestial's hand reaching toward this circle, a circle that could symbolize the world's new supply of adamantium, the world's most versatile metal. In the Oval Office, we see portraits of James Madison, Thomas Jefferson, and John Tyler. Now, these are all 19th century presidents, and thus mostly non-controversial, although John Tyler did annex Texas from Mexico. Now, like these presidents, Ross is trying to cement a lasting legacy by expanding American influence across the globe. Sam tells Ross,
I have to admit, I'm still getting used to the new look.
Which is a tongue-in-cheek way for them to acknowledge that Ross has been recast. Now, we saw something similar when Rhodey was recast in Iron Man 2.
Look, it's me. I'm here. Deal with it. Let's move on.
Ross says,
They said lose the mustache or lose the election.
Which makes sense. Like that mustache symbolized the old Ross, the guy who lost his temper at a press conference. The lack of a mustache shows Ross's desire to change, a theme the movie comes back to again and again. Ross now wants Sam to reform the Avengers, and like Sam, we're not sure if we can trust his motivations.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
In previous movies, Ross didn't want to end superheroes, he wanted to control superheroes. So here, is he being altruistic, or is he trying to create his own team of heroes who answer directly to him? And this is why Sam reminds Ross that it was his Sokovia Accords that broke up the Avengers to begin with. So Ross is honest with him. He tells him that they'll figure it out together. That's his campaign slogan. But this is also Steve's approach to Avengers decision making.
We'll lose, and we'll do that together too.
So I think this is a nice nod to show that Ross is trying to become more like Steve Rogers. In his presentation, he announces that the Celestial statue is filled with adamantium. Now, of course, this is the hardest metal on Earth that covers Wolverine's bones in the X-Men movies. And for copyright reasons, it has not been allowed to be mentioned in an MCU movie until Disney bought the X-Men movie rights back from Fox a few years ago. And he points out that unlike vibranium, this adamantium is not controlled by a single isolationist nation. Remember, in Wakanda Forever, we saw the repercussions of T'Challa revealing Wakanda's advanced technology to the world. Governments like France were trying to steal Wakandan technology, and then the previous United States administration wanted regime change in Wakanda.
The president wants to take offensive action against Wakanda.
What type of offensive action?
Destabilization.
So Ross is now trying to become the anti-Wakanda and ensure mutual, stable world peace by sharing this resource. And then the programming of the assassins is activated by the song Mr. Blue by the Fleetwoods. So this song title is a nod to Stern's codename in The Incredible Hulk. And in the comics, that codename was used by Betty Ross. So the idea of a brainwashed assassin trying to assassinate a political candidate was popularized in the 1959 novel The Manchurian Candidate, which was adapted into 2 films, the first starring Frank Sinatra and years later starring Denzel Washington. The story is a mystery filled with political intrigue, and it was a strong inspiration for the plot of this film. Afterwards, Isaiah jumps through a window and Sam pursues him, which again calls back to Steve chasing down his brainwashed former friend, the Winter Soldier, after he tried to assassinate Nick Fury.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
And the scene where he's arrested is also very similar to when Steve and Sam were arrested in Captain America Civil War. Afterwards, Ross is hidden away in his bunker, and there's a parallel here with Samuel Stearns, who he hid in a bunker for almost 20 years. And then we meet Ruth Bat-Saraff, the head of security for Ross. Now in the comics, she's better known as the superhero Sabra, and I like that they reinvented her as a former Black Widow. She trained in the same Red Room that Natasha and Yelena Belova came from. And remember, the movie Black Widow ended with Yelena saying she was going to travel the world to liberate all the widows from mind control. So, of course, Ruth is able to recognize the leader's mind control technique of using these flashing lights. That, or she saw the TNG episode Chain of Command. Notice that Ruth's jacket has blue accents and her armor plating later on is blue and white, and this is all similar to Sabra's costume in the comics. Then we get to another parallel with the Winter Soldier when Sidewinder attacks Sam in his SUV in broad daylight, like when Bucky attacked Fury. And then we go to Sam's Captain America HQ. Notice how the entire room is like one giant star. We see photos of him and Riley, his old wingman from the Air Force, him and Bucky, and then this child's letter to Captain America accompanied by a drawing. In this photo, we see his sister on the boat from Falcon and the Winter Soldier. This photo is Howard A. Wooten, one of the Tuskegee Airmen, a group of African-American fighter pilots from World War II. Remember, Sam is a veteran of the Air Force, so these Red Tails would have been his heroes. And notice Joaquin has a Miami Heat jacket because, just like in the comics, he is from Florida. So Joaquin, who remember is Sam's
guy in the chair,
tracks down the mind control signals to a prison called Echo 1. So in the comics, Echo 1 has a dark history. There was a storyline where Captain America was revealed to have been a secret Hydra agent for decades, and he helped Hydra to take over America, and Echo 1 was the name of their inhuman internment camp. So this base's name is hinting at Ross's nefarious government conspiracy, using the leader's abilities for his own benefit. And when they're traveling to the base, this reminded me of another scene in The Winter Soldier where Steve and Natasha were traveling to another secret government base that was hiding a government conspiracy. And Joaquin is passing the time by playing the old Atari game Defender on a flip phone.
Yeah, why is he on that old phone?
Well, because they ditched their smartphones, and old flip phones don't have GPS trackers. Sam keeps his shield in the trunk, kind of like where Tony kept it in Avengers Endgame. In Stearns' lab, we see his diploma, noting that he graduated from Grayburn University, the same university that we saw in The Incredible Hulk. And also, we see the crest for that university on his desktop wallpaper. The lab also features this chair, much like the one where he experimented on Bruce Bruce and Emil Blonsky in that same movie. Also, the room has this chain link fence and dungeon aesthetic that seems inspired by Francis Ford Coppola's 70s conspiracy film, The Conversation. In that movie, Gene Hackman plays a character who's paid to intercept other people's private communications, but then he loses control of his own paranoia. And this is very similar to Ross in this movie, who loses his own internal battle against his worst instincts. Both The Conversation and this movie end with those characters destroying the environments around them. We also see the flashing lights here that Stearns uses to brainwash people. And we've seen this technology in the MCU before. In Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Hydra used a Faustus machine to brainwash their agents. Of all the characters in this movie, I was most excited to see the official debut of the leader, aka Samuel Stearns. Now, in the comics, his origin is similar to Bruce Banner's. He was in a gamma accident that changed his physical appearance. But whereas the gamma radiation turned genius Bruce into a simple-minded Hulk, the radiation took Stearns, a man of below average intelligence, and turned him into a mega genius. So this gave him green skin, a big head, and he soon became fascinated with the Hulk, wanting to create an army of gamma mutates that would worship him as a god. Now, in the MCU, his origin is a little different, but with a similar motivation. He was a university scientist that was working on a method to cure Bruce Banner. But, unbeknownst to Bruce, he was secretly replicating Banner's blood.
We'll unlock hundreds of cures. We will make humans impervious to disease.
So, just like in the comics, he is obsessed with Banner's blood and replicating the Hulk. After he mutates Emil Blonsky, his lab is destroyed, but his brain starts to mutate into the leader that we see in this movie. Now, I thought the leader looked a little silly and was much more threatening when we saw him in the shadows. But let me know your thoughts on the leader's appearance down in the comments. He has been guiding Ross's movements for the past 16 years by examining probabilities, which also makes us re-examine the entire history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but we're going to talk about that in a future video. Now, the leader's look must have changed in reshoots because he looks totally different in all of the official merch. Although in one scene, they did seem to be copying the original FBI sketch of the Unabomber. Ruth intervenes to save them and shows off some of her Black Widow moves, including a running up a wall to take down a guy who's twice her size. And afterwards, they go on the run from authorities and find allies in a hidden base. Again, just like Steve and Natasha and the Winter Soldier, who found refuge at Fury's secret base. Then we go back to Ross and we see him using his heart meds. Remember, we heard about his bad ticker in Civil War.
5 years ago, I had a heart attack.
But also, Ross has to work to calm himself down, which parallels Bruce Banner and the Incredible Hulk, who had to work to control his own heart rate. Now, this is actually a clever character parallel. Ross's obsession with Banner ruins his life. He's the Captain Ahab to Banner's Moby Dick. In effect, Ross has allowed himself to slowly become a monster over the years. So, Banner tried to control his breathing and heart rate to avoid becoming a monster, while Ross took the leader's heart pills because he wanted to stop being a monster. He wanted to live long enough to reconcile with his daughter Betty. But inadvertently, Ross's desire to change is what makes him vulnerable to becoming a literal burning rage monster. All through the movie, we see Ross continuing to struggle with his violent instincts. As the gamma radiation in his body starts to overwhelm his mind, he finally reverts to his old military general self, saying that if there is going to be a World War III, he wants to be on the front lines, personally asserting American military superiority. So I like that over and over again in this movie, we see that Sam's real superpower is not his military training, it's his training as a social worker. He is able to get Ross in a room and get him to tell him the truth, simply because he is a caring, empathetic man. Ross's involvement with Stearns began as a cover-up. He didn't want people to know that he was actually responsible for setting the abomination loose at Harlem. But then, as his power in politics grew, this power corrupted him more and more until he finally became the kind of monster that keeps a man held hostage in a prison dungeon. Now, Sam hears all of this and simply tells Ross, I know what it's like to have something to prove. So he's referring to the events of Falcon and the Winter Soldier when he felt like that he could never live up to the legacy of Steve Rogers. Again, his superpower is empathy. And then the Battle of Celestial Island starts, and I thought it was a lot of fun to see a superhero flying around during a normal battle engagement. It marries the worldly with the fantastical. And Sam is like not an overpowered hero, so there's an actual weight to these events. He can't just stop the jet, he actually struggles to avert World War III. The sequence also borrowed a lot from Iron Man fighting the jet fighters in Iron Man 1, particularly when they have to make sure to save the pilots' lives. But also, in that movie, it felt like Tony was having a genuinely rough time stopping advanced military technology, just like the sequence in this movie. During the dogfight, notice the enemy fighters follow that Top Gun rule. All the enemies are wearing visors that hide their faces, so they become anonymously evil. Also, and this is huge, the missiles seem to be powered by repulsor technology and not jet propulsion. This could mean that Tony Stark sold this tech to the Japanese when he was still a weapons manufacturer. After all, the Jericho missiles were powered by similar technology.
It's the first missile system to incorporate demonstrate our proprietary repulsor technology.
After the battle, Joaquin goes into the hospital, and we get another parallel to the Winter Soldier. Steve looking through the glass at Fury in the hospital, and now Sam looking at his wingman, the Falcon, through a similar pane of glass. And then we get the return of Bucky Barnes, who helps Sam to eventually take on the Cap mantle in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. He's now growing his hair out for the new Thunderbolts movie that comes out in a couple months. And we hear that he is running for Congress, which, by the way, tracks because we see him at official government proceedings in the Thunderbolts trailer. They mention that Steve stopped 2 alien invasions, which is technically true because they were not able to stop Thanos in Infinity War. And then Sam talks about how he should have taken the serum.
Wait, I missed that. Where was that?
Well, in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, he, Zemo, and Bucky track down new Super Soldier serum, and Sam opts not to take it. And for one thing, good. It makes him a much more interesting character if he's just a guy and not someone with superpowers. Like Bucky tells him, people believed in Steve, but they aspire to be Sam. Sam is just a normal guy doing his best, which gives us all a goal that maybe we could actually achieve. In the Oval Office, we see a framed photo of Liv Tyler's Betty Ross, foreshadowing her cameo at the end of the film. And then the leader turns himself in, also he could leak his story to the press.
But couldn't he do that without turning himself in?
Yes, but he turns himself in to leak the story to the press. And this causes Ross to finally let go during his Rose Garden speech and to become his own type of rage monster. So now let's talk about the Red Hulk, who was given a very cool introduction in the comics. He debuted in Hulk Volume 2, Number 1, and he was created by Jeff Loeb and Ed McGuinness, and for years, they kept his real identity a secret. It was really fun to read at the time. We were always looking for clues about the Red Hulk's real identity. The character was very different from any other Hulk. He retained his intelligence, he used weapons, and overall had a badass attitude. He could also absorb energy, just like we briefly see in this movie. So just like in the movie, the Red Hulk turns out to be Thunderbolt Ross, but the character had a slightly different origin. In the comics, Ross actually died, and then the leader discovered his body and resurrected him. But then, after Betty was killed by the Abomination, Ross wanted revenge, so he teamed up with the leader and MODOK. Yes, this MODOK.
I'm such a dick.
Together, they formed a group called the Intelligentsia that turned Ross into the Red Hulk. First, he was a villain, then a hero, then an Avenger. The mystery was a lot of fun until the truth was finally revealed in the crossover World War Hulks. Now, during the transformation, notice he burns the carpet, because in the comics, the Red Hulk is radioactive and actually absorbs and emits energy. He fights the US military by waving around an American flag, which is not the most subtle moment in the MCU. Hulk wrecks the Washington Monument, and man, they just finished rebuilding the elevator after Spider-Man broke it in Homecoming. We see that Sam's new wings can fire darts, like Archangel's metal wings in the comics. And, I should have mentioned this earlier, his new suit takes the star emblem from Steve's Winter Soldier suit, but then adds in stripes on his abs. And his new wings have a hexagonal mesh that is the same pattern we saw in Black Panther's concussive shielding. And I should note that the reason the shield and wings can withstand a Hulk punch is because vibranium absorbs kinetic energy, so it essentially disseminates the force of a Hulk's punch.
It's completely vibration absorbent.
And during the fight, the Hulk also does the classic sonic clap. And man, people will never learn that bullets just do not work on Hulks. But vibranium does work, so Sam's darts are actually able to penetrate his skin. And then he sends in the Red Wing drones to go after his eyes, temporarily blinding him, which is how the Red Hulk was once captured in the comics. So the fight ends up at the cherry blossoms in DC, and there is so much meaning packed into these trees. Japan gave these trees to the United States in 1912, so they are traditionally regarded as a symbol of friendship and reconciliation. And we even see a single cherry blossom at the Japanese Prime Minister's garden earlier in the film. Cherry blossoms symbolize the impermanence of beauty. They only bloom for a short while, so in a way they are a symbol of both life and death. So Ross talks about how he and Betty used to see the cherry blossoms when she was a child. So these blossoms represent that one time in his life when he felt like he was a good dad. But that moment in time turned out to be a fleeting period, as he allowed his life to become consumed with obsessions like his military career, subduing the Hulk, and controlling superheroes. So, in his rage, Ross destroys half of these cherry blossom trees. He's literally destroying the best part of his past. And when Red Hulk sees these cherry blossom trees, it triggers this memory, and he's able to finally calm down and submit himself to authorities. Now, when he comes to, Sam does his version of the "hey big guy, the sun's getting really low" that we saw in Age of Ultron. And then we go to the Raft, the prison for superpowered people that we first saw in Captain America Civil War. And like they say in the movie, this is a role reversal. The last time these two men were in this space, Ross had Sam prisoner for violating the Sokovia Accords. And also, I should note, Baron Zemo is currently being held here, as Io said in Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
We will take him to the raft.
So Sam fills us in on everything that's happened. Ross gave up his office, but his legacy is cemented. The Ozaki-Ross Accords will become international law that distributes adamantium equitably among the nations of the world. So I feel like this will probably be the last time we see Ross in the MCU, at least before the franchise is rebooted after Secret Wars. And somehow, in the background of all of these movies, we saw this secondary villain get a full character arc that is finally resolved with his daughter reconciling with him. And then we get another callback to the Winter Soldier with Sam visiting Joaquin in the hospital, just like he once visited Steve.
On your left.
And his main takeaway from this film is that the world needs the Avengers, and he wants Joaquin on the team. And guys, don't worry, we are going to follow up with a video speculating the lineup of this new Avengers team and how this post-credit sets up Avengers Doomsday. We also talked about that in our Ending Explained video, which is up on the channel right now. In that post-credit scene, he teases Sam about his knowledge of the multiverse. And I think it makes sense that Stearns would know the multiverse exists because, as we see in this movie, he predicts the future by calculating probabilities. And the multiverse is essentially created by different probabilities. This is how Stephen Strange was able to see so many possible futures in Avengers Infinity War. So we have a lot more to say about Captain America Brave New World in the coming week or so. So subscribe to ScreenCrush, don't forget to check out our merch links below, and to hit our link to get a huge discount from Cufflinks.com. So what did you guys think of the movie? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, or at me on Twitter, Blue Sky, or Threads, or on our free-to-join Discord server. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.